Welcome to the show. Did you tune in because you're having difficulties with meal times at home? Or are you frustrated and exhausted because it feels like your child will only eat a handful of foods? Well, today you're in luck because our guest today is a registered dietitian who specializes in autism, and she has lots of insights to share with us to help your child expand their feeding choices and overall nutrition. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Autism Family Resource Podcast, where we provide guidance and insights for parenting neurodiverse children. From Pure Hearts Therapy, I'm your host, Brian Keene. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today's guest is Brittyn. Brittyn is a registered dietitian, autism nutrition expert, and the creator of the Autism Nutrition Library. She works with parents of children with autism to expand accepted foods for picky eaters and improve gut health by looking deep to find the root causes of their symptoms and ultimately help them feel their best so that they can thrive.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Brian.
Appreciate you for being on the show. So, tell everyone a little bit more about you and how you got into this work.
Yeah, so my name is Brittyn Coleman. I run the practice Autism Dietitian. So many people may know me from Instagram. I'm also on Facebook, my website, autismdietitian.com. And as the name says, I am a dietitian who specializes in autism, and I help kids learn to expand their safe foods to help them get the nutrition that they need, because when kids can't get the nutrients like their vitamins and minerals, omegas, all these things, it can just help them feel better, but it can also help them do better in school and therapies in life. And that's what my whole practice is about. And I started, my younger brother's on the autism spectrum. And so growing up with him really taught me so much about autism, of course, but also nutrition and picky eating. He was a really limited eater. He actually ate 5 foods for the longest time. And I'm sure a lot of parents can resonate with this. It was chicken nuggets, french fries from McDonald's only, yogurt, Lay's potato chips, and applesauce. And that was all he ate. And I never understood, why doesn't Barrett eat the foods that I eat or expand? And I learned over time. And then when I became a dietitian, I decided to dedicate my practice to this area because there are very few people who do it. And I love it. And so it's been a really special journey to support, thousands of people in helping their kids expand their diet.
That's awesome. That's a lot to take in right there. I love what you said about the chicken nuggets and the pizza and certain brands, and there's so many families like that where they're like, "What do I do with this?" So let's go ahead and jump into it. Give us some insights when we do have kids who only eat a few foods. Where do you start? What is our starting point here?
So it's going to look different for everybody. I mean, those foods that I just listed off, I'm sure a lot of parents can resonate of like, oh yeah, that's my kid, chicken nuggets and french fries. So that's really common for kids to start at, but not everybody's going to have the same, 5, 10, 15 preferred foods. So I go through this exercise with my clients and I say, hey, let's take an inventory. What do your children currently eat? We write down literally everything, even if it's the same food, but maybe prepared in a different way or cooked a different way, then we still write that food down. And then what we go through is an exercise where we break it down from a sensory profile, because the reason why a lot of children are sensitive to the foods that they eat or selective about the foods they eat is because they may also have sensory processing disorder, which can affect the foods that they the foods that they want to eat based on their sensory needs and their sensory processing abilities. And so we break down those foods and say, okay, what does the texture look like? What does the color look like? What about the temperature? Even the taste? And we come up with this quote unquote food sensory profile, or maybe there's a few different ones of like, okay, they really like beige, crunchy, salty foods. But then they also really like pink soft foods, trying to figure out what does this child prefer. And instead of going off into something completely random, but healthy, of course, like broccoli, that's going to be green and mushy and completely different than their sensor profile, we figure out foods that are going to be more likely to be successful. And we start off that way because, one, it's not as overwhelming to the child because it feels more comfortable. And it also gives the parent a very clear idea of what to do next in terms of which foods are going to be the most successful. So we start there and build confidence with the child. And eventually we can expand out and get to that broccoli, but usually we don't start there.
So it sounds like you guys are kind of, like you said, that profile. It's almost like the safe foods. You start with the safe foods, and then it's almost like you're building out from there. Does that sound right?
Yeah, there's this process called food chaining, and a lot of people are familiar with food chaining. So I take bits and pieces from different types of like feeding therapy or feeding tips that are geared toward children with autism or perhaps just picky eating as a whole, and kind of pick it all out and piece it together that works for children with sensory processing disorder and autism. So that's part of food chaining that I integrate into my method.
Awesome. And I'm also going to ask some questions that came from family members. One of the questions that came up is, as children get older, do you feel like they will expand their food preferences? Will their foods expand over time?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors here because my easy answer is probably. But the reason why kids would have more success over time is because they have more exposure to those new foods. They have more time, right? So if you're 2 years old, you only have a certain amount of exposure to certain foods versus if you're 12 years old. Now, one thing that's important to hit on is that that just doesn't happen without any kind of effort. We can't just wait 10 years and just say, oh, they're probably going to eat new foods in 10 years. If we're not working on it at all, if we're not exposing them to any new foods, and that doesn't mean that we're forcing them to eat, because I never force kids to eat. This could just be interacting with it, could be talking about it, learning about it, smelling it, all these different ways to expose them to the new foods. Then we can start to see more success. Of course, there's more to it than that. But if we never expose kids to those new things, sometimes we see parents are picky eaters too, then it's hard to have them expand the foods that they'll eat if they never have any kind of interaction with new foods.
I like the way you put that. I always kind of tell parents it's like when you like even just simple meal preps with your kids can help with exposure to foods. Like even if they aren't trying it, they're smelling it, they're interacting with it. So I really like the way you put that. And then it feels safer, right? Over time, the food's safer. It's not as foreign to them. But with that, I got a question about nutrition. So kind of when there are a few limited foods, how do you feel about nutrition and making sure kids are getting their nutrients or enough nutrients in their diets? And do you recommend supplementing? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, when kids only eat a few different foods, and a lot of times if they're processed foods, which is common that they are, and I want to hit on that really quick before I move forward. A lot of kids love to eat processed foods, fast foods, and not like a home cooked meal. And usually the reason behind that is because a packaged food or something that you pick up from the drive through, it's always going to taste the same. It's going to feel the same in your mouth. You know exactly what to expect. And so for kids who already are feeling some sort of sensory overwhelm just from the world around them, food is something that is so sensory rich, it can be super overwhelming. And so having something that they know to expect and rely on and something they like, they're going to choose that first. And so, that being said, those foods don't have all the vitamins and minerals that we need to grow and thrive and feed our brain. So, if a child only eats those foods, the first thing I would say, find a feeding therapist. Let's find somebody to help you expand. I also run online programs to help families expand their child's diet. I have small group coaching programs, online courses, I have a membership, I have tons of resources depending on what the parent needs or what kind of support that they need, because they all offer different levels of support. First, get in there or get on a wait list. Then supplements can be helpful, But I want us to realize that supplements are not a long-term solution. They can help short-term fill in the gaps. So while you're working on expanding your child's diet, supplements can help your child meet their nutrition need. But I don't want us to rely on them long-term and not work on expanding their diet because there's so many other nutrients that are so important from food that you can't get from a supplement. But like I said, they can be incredibly helpful to help fill in those gaps. And I use supplements all the time. I just want people to understand the use of them, like how to use them correctly.
Awesome. And kind of expanding on supplements and their use and understanding nutrients, is there any tips you have for constipation? Because I know gut health is very relevant in our population, and a lot of kids suffer with gut issues, and one of them is constipation. Is there any certain foods or any certain way to kind of help that you can think of?
One of the biggest contributors to constipation is picky eating. So, when we address picky eating, that can really help kids have regular, easier to pass bowel movements. The reason why that happens is because when kids are limited in their eating, a lot of times the first foods that are avoided are fruits and veggies and whole grains that have lots of fiber, which helps us have regular and healthy, easy to pass bowel movements. The other thing is fluid. Our bowel movements are, I believe, 75% fluid. And so we really need a lot of hydration in order to have easy bowel movements. So if they don't drink enough water or they don't eat enough fiber, that's a major issue. So we got to think of diet first. There are certain fruits and veggies that have great amounts of fiber and can specifically be helpful for constipation. A few of those: pears, kiwi, chia seeds. I love chia seeds. You can even soak them overnight, where they just have, they're super hydrating. If you soak them overnight, they become this gel, and that can also help with bowel movements. Beans and legumes can be helpful for bowel movements as well. I mean, there's so many fruits and veggies that can be so helpful. Like I said, whole grains too. From a supplement side, a lot of times I'm using magnesium to help stools be easier to pass. Magnesium citrate specifically is an osmotic laxative, which can help make bowel movements easier to pass. There's so many other tips. I actually have an entire online course called Healthy Poops Academy that is geared toward kids who don't have regular, easy to pass bowel movements and are chronically constipated. So if somebody is struggling with that, those are very small tips from that entire course, but it's a huge course just all about constipation.
I'll link that on the show notes so that the parents are interested can find that.
Cool.
So going into kind of sticking into this theme of these kind of fast foods and limited diet, kind of what goes with that is weight gain or excess weight on the body. So I have a few kids who are kind of on the heavier side. Is any tips for weight gain or the weight, or I should say weight loss to help with that?
Yeah. One thing that can happen for kids who are limited in the foods that they'll eat, maybe they'll eat 5 or 10 different foods. It is common for them to be underweight or overweight. It can really go either way because you can overeat healthy foods too, even if the foods that they're eating are healthy. And that being said, I mean, definitely speak with a dietitian or doctor if you feel that your child is not within their healthy weight range, to make sure, because and have that conversation with them, because of course every child is going to be different. What we want to focus on, a lot of the same things that I talked about with constipation, we're working on a fiber rich, nutrient dense diet. And this is really hard for kids who have limited diets because a lot of those foods are not very appealing from a sensory perspective. It's hard for them to eat. And so, overall, what we're wanting to do is expand the number of foods that we have in their food repertoire so that we have more variability, so that they could eat foods that are higher in nutrients, higher in fiber, higher in water, other foods higher in protein as well. We really want this well-rounded diet. For kids, we're not ever doing like some kind of, or I'm not doing any kind of weight loss program. What we're doing is promoting a healthy diet. We're promoting a healthy lifestyle, because it's more about continuing this long term and teaching kids how to integrate this into their lifestyle, instead of doing, a month or two of restricting the foods that they eat. And we don't ever want to do that with kids, especially picky eaters, because pulling their favorite foods can also lead to more picky eating and other nutritional issues. So it's definitely best done alongside a dietitian if you feel that your child is, overweight or obese and needs to, lose weight in order to be, in a healthy weight range.
Okay. So it sounds like kind of like adults. Well, studies been shown that crash course diets don't really work. So definitely those small lifestyle changes, right, over time
Mhm.
should hopefully lead to weight loss or healthy weight, because that could be subjective as well, right? But a healthier
True.
weight.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, so true. Those crash diets, they don't ever work and they just wreck your metabolism. And so maybe they worked the first time and that's why they feel so appealing to adults. But the next time you go on the same diet, your metabolism is going to fight you even harder and harder and harder. And just over time, as adults or kids, just making, those small tweaks and keeping with a healthy lifestyle is going to keep your metabolism healthy as well. And that's what we want for kids on the spectrum. We want them to have healthy metabolisms. We want them to be eating enough, because eating too little can halt your metabolism as well and could cause weight gain. So it's surprising to a lot of people, but we have to make sure they're eating enough too, and enough of the right things.
Going kind of with that, if we have a child who's this is a interesting phenomenon that we see, and I'm sure you've seen a couple times where we'll have a child who eats one food. We'll say noodles because that's we go with noodles. Love noodles. They saw it on a TV show. All they want to eat is noodles, nothing else. Then all of a sudden they stop eating the noodles. Then they're like, parents like, oh my goodness, what do we eat? He's not eating any of this. And then they come back to noodles again. So it's like they switch back and forth. Tell me your experience with this and any advice you have.
Yeah, so the term for that is food jagging, if anyone needed a term for it. But oh, it's so stressful when a kid's favorite food, they eat it, eat it, eat it, and then they burn out. Some kids come back to those foods, and some kids don't if they're extreme picky eaters. And that's so stressful for parents. And so what I recommend, if we notice that a child is eating the same food over and over and over again, we want to prevent burning out on that food as much as possible. So, what I talk to parents about is how can we change little things about this to at least offer some kind of variety. Again, we want to be working with a feeding therapist or at least be on a wait list or doing some kind of program to help expand their diet in the first place. But with those safe foods, we want to keep them safe as long as possible. So if they're, let's say that this child just loves spaghetti and that's their favorite kind. If they will not eat any other kind of pasta right now, and it is just that spaghetti with butter on it, what we could do one time we could serve it as like the long whole pieces of spaghetti. Next time we might cut up the spaghetti and just it's the same exact spaghetti, it's just cut up. It's served a different way. Maybe one time we can serve it dry with the butter on the side and the child can mix it themselves. Maybe sometime we'll put a little bit of pepper on it, the smallest amount to just make it look different, but not taste considerably different. So what we're trying to do every single day is just change small, tiny amounts of it. You could overcook it once, undercook it once. It just offering that kind of variety can help them prevent burning out on that food. And that's what we want to prevent. Over time, we could work on different types of noodles. Maybe we could use the exact same brand, exact same ingredients, but maybe it's just a different shape. And we could gradually work on that over time so that we're keeping the taste and the texture pretty consistent, but it changes the dish entirely. So we try to just keep as many variables the same as we can, but encourage that variety.
Okay, I love the way you put that because it almost reminds me of like meal prepping. I've tried this in the past, and I was like, "Oh, I cannot chicken and rice every day gets old." So we find little ways to change it up, and I think that kind of resonate with me the way you explained that.
Totally true. And I don't know about you. I've been a person who's eaten the same thing. I get hooked on things. I'm like, oh, this tastes so good to me right now. And then I burn out and I'm like, I can never eat that again. And I'm like, if I just would have changed it up a little bit, I could have helped myself and I could still enjoy X, Y, and Z. So I'm the same way. And so, yeah, the more we can switch it up, I mean, who likes to eat the same thing every single day forever? We want to change things up too. And even that little change can offer a variety of nutrients as well.
Awesome. All right, I have another question. When you have a child who's only drinking one thing, it's a certain color, like a blue juice, and it's out of the same cup, and there's no variance. And this is all we have. Obviously, we're leaning towards sensory. Where do we go with this? How do we expand their horizons?
So I'll give my thoughts as a dietitian, but would totally recommend bringing in speech, occupational therapists like yourself too, because they have so many different ideas in terms of like how to drink from a cup, the oral motor control. Because when I see that kids only drink from one cup, sometimes my mind not only sensory, but I think, is there some kind of oral motor control issue where they're not physically able to eat or drink from something else? Now, it can come down to preference, but if they're only drinking from one sippy cup, is an oral motor control issue. So just wanted to say that, and that's a little out of my realm of practice, but I think everyone should consider that piece. But what I do, I don't ever like to go cold turkey on anything because that drastic change is so unpredictable for kids, especially for kids on the spectrum. That can be so stressful. Going from my favorite cup every single day to all of a sudden my favorite cup is thrown away. I'll never see it again. It's usually not that all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'll just drink something out of something else this time. It's no, I'm not drinking anything at all. And so what we want to do is make some gradual transitions. So if we're wanting them to drink out of a different cup, perhaps we could, exposure is going to be a huge thing too, just like we talked about with foods. Drinking is the same way. So exposure to different cups, putting their same favorite drink in there. A lot of times we're only trying to change one thing up at a time. So you're not going to be changing up the cup and the drink. You need to choose one. And so you can offer, their favorite drink in their favorite cup half full. And we could have another cup that has it half full as well. So they get something that's comfortable to them. But then we have an opportunity for them to expand that feels somewhat comfortable because it's their favorite drink, just in a little bit of a different cup. So I do that with foods too. We always want to have a safe and preferred food available. But if we're changing things up, we could always half the portion size of what they're eating, change up the new portion size a little bit differently. So they still have the food available to them. It's just a little bit different. And that encourages growth. We just have to do it in the right way.
It's almost like that crumbs method, those small little changes.
Mhm.
And then I love how you brought up the oral motor part, which I never thought about because, yeah, the kid I'm thinking of has a sippy cup, and that is what he uses to drink. And funny story, they had a crisis weekend a little while back where the preferred cup got lost.
Yes. Oh, it's so scary. Yeah, and that's another reason to have variety is because you get in those binds. I see parents all the time reaching out, like, in Facebook groups of, like, "This cup has been discontinued. Does anyone else have one that they can send me? Because my child will only drink out of this." And it's so scary. I don't blame them for being so stressed out, and, we have to assess all the different pieces to help them expand. But, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that
stressful.
that was a moment. He literally drank no water for a couple days and
Yeah.
finally gave in. So we definitely want to try to do things to prevent that again.
Mhm. Yeah, I know, and I'll say one quick thing on that too. Some practitioners who aren't familiar with autism will recommend the quote unquote starve it out method, which is what just happened, what you explained, but it was not on purpose, um,
Mm,
because they lost the cup. They couldn't do anything about it. Now, what some people say is, well, just stop giving them these quote unquote unhealthy foods, and eventually they'll eat when they're hungry, or stop giving them the sippy cup and eventually they'll drink when they're thirsty. And like I said, what just happened was a total accident because the cup was lost. They couldn't do anything about it. But doing it on purpose, that can actually lead kids to like malnutrition or severe dehydration. And so some practitioners who aren't familiar with autism take that route. And I've seen kids end up in the ER for it. And so that's why I take such a specific approach, because it's successful. It takes longer, of course, but we're not ending up with severe dehydration or malnutrition because we're taking an approach that is more sensory oriented.
Gotcha. That makes sense. That does sound very traumatizing. I mean, it sounded traumatizing for the event that I was told, but yeah, just to do it on purpose sounds not the best. I'll say that.
Right. But sometimes people are desperate and they want their kids to eat new things. And sometimes that feels like the only solution, even though it's not.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to have one more question for you. Do you think that nutritional deficiencies can contribute to picky eating?
Absolutely. So we actually are very clear that certain nutrients, specific like certain minerals specifically, like iron, if you are deficient, it can both cause you to lose your appetite. So anorexia is the technical term for that. But certain nutrients, if you're low in them, can actually cause you to crave certain foods, even non-food items. So if you're severely deficient in iron and or zinc, you can actually develop something called pica, P-I-C-A, and that is craving non-food items. So sometimes I'll see parents who come in and like they won't eat any new foods, but all they'll want to do is eat sand, rocks, cardboard, paper. And it's actually due to a severe nutrient deficiency. And it sounds like that would be something that would be rare, but it's not. A lot of times kids aren't eating iron rich foods either. So iron is commonly low and can turn into some kind of issue like that. Or for kids who are only eating a few different foods over time, that can totally turn into a nutrient deficiency. I see that all the time. So iron is one of the biggest ones. Low levels of B12, vitamin B12, zinc, lots of nutrient deficiencies can cause lack of appetite or really just change your preference for foods. Like zinc specifically too is so important for smell and taste that if you had really low zinc levels, it could alter your smell and or taste and preference for foods. So it's really interesting. So nutrient deficiencies definitely play a role there, and it's hard because if you don't have an appetite for foods and then you eat less and then you develop more nutrient deficiencies that then play into that more. It's just this never ending cycle. So we have to break that. And that's where supplements can come in. If kids are really selective, repleting those nutrient deficiencies can be one thing to help break the cycle, to help them then expand the foods that they'll eat.
And I was thinking about the iron you said. I guess that in a way, if you're sensing thing or wanting things that are non-food items, that could kind of lead to those oral seeking behaviors, right? Putting our mouths on stuff. So
Yeah, and it's hard too because, for kids on the spectrum, a lot of times they do crave that sensory input. So sometimes it's hard to tell, okay, is this a sensory seeking behavior? Is this pica? Is this like a nutrient deficiency? What's going on here? And so that's where like nutrition lab testing can be really helpful, seeing a dietitian, doing a full diet analysis. And at the end of the day, maybe it is a sensory seeking behavior, but at least you've ruled out these other nutritional concerns.
gotcha. So I think there's a lot of different things going on. So it almost sounds like that one of the best approaches is to reach out to a dietitian and a therapist and collaborate, right? A team effort, and then the child too, because the child should have a say as well.
Absolutely. And I will say, not all dietitians are trained in this field. Some dietitians may just do picky eating, but a lot of those picky eating approaches, like I said, like the starve it out method, does not work for kids on the spectrum. So if you are looking for a dietitian, be sure that they're familiar with approaches for autism. I actually have trainings for practitioners that if you have a practitioner you're already working with that you'd like to be trained better or have a mentorship, I do that. And like I said, I have small group coaching programs, online courses, a membership site, all of these different resources to help parents with where they're at. so they can learn more about, next steps to help their kids expand their diet in a way that works for them, because there's no cookie cutter approach. It's all individualized.
It's awesome. Yeah, definitely great to have resources. So let's end off with a message for families or a takeaway or just some recap.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that I always just say to families, nutrition is hard. This is really stressful for a lot of families, and some people just feel like, oh, I have to follow X, Y, and Z diet or else it's not worth it. Know that small changes make a difference, and those little small changes over time, they build up, and you look back months later and you think, oh my goodness, look at where I am now versus where I was. So just know that those small changes over time make a difference, and you can do this. It is so hard, but it's important to have somebody who's there to support you and point you in the right direction, because you don't have to do this alone. So just remember, you're not alone on your journey, though sometimes it can feel super isolating, but just finding somebody to guide you and help you along the way, like a trained professional, can be really helpful. And this is another reason why I run small group programs, is because families do feel so isolated sometimes and need professional guidance, but also want community. And so they're able to meet other parents who are working on the same goals as them, and be able to get support from not only a professional, but other parents who get it as well.
We can do this in team effort. Just so people know and they don't forget, if they want to reach out and find more information, how do they find out about you?
Yeah, my website is a great place to start. It's autismdietitian.com. Instagram is also, I'm there almost every day posting. There's, I have over maybe around 40,000 followers there. So that's where most people find me, is Instagram. But checking out my website, you can see my membership site. All of my different resources will be outlined there. So both of those are great resources. And I actually have a podcast too called Nourishing Autism. So you can find that, anywhere that you can find podcasts. Wherever you're listening to this one, mine's probably there too.
Awesome. And I'll link all of those in the show notes. Well, thanks again, Brittyn, Cole, for being on the show.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I want to say thank you again to Brittyn Coleman for coming onto the show and sharing her wisdom. Brittyn's right. Feeding is hard, and there is no one fixed solution that is going to suddenly expand your child's feeding options. The key takeaway here is to be patient and use your resources. If you are having difficulties with feeding, reach out to a feeding specialist. They will help you create a food sensory profile that consists of preferred foods, textures, colors, and tastes. From there, find creative ways to make small modifications to these foods so that your child does not burn out on these foods. And throughout this journey, don't forget to continue to expose your child to other foods. This doesn't mean to force foods on them, but instead encourage your child to touch, smell, or even taste bite-sized pieces of food while you're preparing meals at home. The resources shared in this show are created to empower your family to thrive. I believe community leads to growth and learning, so let's connect. Follow me on the Pure Hearts Therapy social media pages where you can contact me directly for questions. The links to this show and my contact information are in the show notes. Just scroll down in your podcast player or simply visit pureheartstherapy.com for more information. Thanks for listening to the Autism Family Resource Podcast. Subscribe now for more resources to empower your family to thrive and live your best lives. See you next time.